listeners, and welcome to the NK News Podcast. I am your host, Jacko Zwetsloot, and this podcast is recorded on Monday, the 28th of May, 2018, here in our Seoul studio. I am joined by NK News boss man Chad O'Carroll.
안녕하십니까.
Chae impersonator Dagyum Ji.
안녕하세요.
And Oliver Hotham.
Hello.
Hello. This is a rapid response podcast that we're doing after the dizzying events of the last 3 days. I don't even know where to begin. Well, let's begin with what we talked about on our last Roundtable podcast. That was recorded on the 16th of May, so 12 days ago. That was the day that North Korea suddenly cancelled its high-level talks with South Korean officials. And it was 1 or 2 days after the date of 12th of June and the location of Singapore were confirmed for the Trump-Kim summit. So, what's happened since then? Who wants to start?
So we had the North Koreans pulled out of these inter-Korean talks. They released a statement where they said that due to Max Thunder, which we talked about, and among other things, there was the Taeyong-ho statement that they also complained about. They would no longer be engaging in inter-Korean talks. And then roughly a day after that, Ri Sung-kwon emerged and said that no inter-Korean talks would happen until these issues were resolved. So it all seemed a little bit bleak. And then as things developed, this kind of war of words escalated between the US and the North Koreans. Bolton kept talking about this Libya model.
Right. Trump also mentioned the Libya model, didn't he?
He did, but he kind of misunderstood the Libya model, because when Bolton was referring to it, it's obviously still quite a loaded term, but he's talking about when Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons in 2003.
After the Iraq invasion.
It should be pointed out, a very nascent nuclear
weapons program.
Right.
But then Trump said that the Libya model is actually that the US goes in and decimates Libya. Mm-hmm. And then Trump said, if Kim's not careful, that'll happen to him. Or he said if no deal was made, that would happen to him. And
right.
The North Koreans clearly didn't like that, and they released a couple of statements, one of which was by Chae, who's in the studio with us today. In which
Thank
she
you
said,
for coming, Ms. Chae. Madam Chae.
In which she said that the North Korea would never beg the United States for dialogue,
right.
And that she called Bolton like an idiot, that he didn't understand that Libya was nothing like North Korea, because North Korea has nuclear weapons and ICBMs, etc., etc. And then on Thursday night, our time, we found out that Trump had sent this letter to Kim Jong Un, in which, very sad letter.
Hold on, before we go there, let me ask Dagyum, where did Chae Son-hee make that statement?
So North's state-run media, Korean Central News Agency, released a statement from Chae Son-hee online first, and apparently Chae Son-hee harshly criticized Mike Pence for comparing North Korea with Libya models. So interesting part is that Chae Son-hee described herself as one who has been engaged in U.S. affairs for a long time, and she couldn't clearly understand this Pence's statement and criticized Pence for misunderstanding the situations on the Korean peninsula.
What's her official title?
Vice Foreign Minister.
Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the DPRK.
And we actually exclusively reported that promotion a few months ago, as a little shout out to ourselves.
Yeah, she's responsible for America's division. So there are, is it six vice foreign ministers in the DPRK? But yeah, so she was recently upgraded from a position.
She was like head of the North America department.
Director General of North American Affairs at the Foreign Ministry. Yeah.
And then Trump wrote this letter to Kim Jong Un saying,
Trump wrote the letter. That's right.
Because of the statement, he said, because of like the anger in your recent statements, I've decided it would be inappropriate to hold the summit on June 12th in Singapore. And that was obviously huge news for everyone, and quite disappointing news for a lot of people. The fallout was extremely emotional in lots of ways. The South Koreans said, we're trying to work out what Trump means. And there was that picture that came out from the Blue House of Moon Jae-in and all his top officials just looking absolutely crestfallen at about 1 a.m.
Right.
They'd just been pulled out of bed and didn't really know what to say.
So yeah, the letter was distributed on Thursday night, South Korean time, and we were dealing with the fallout early Friday. But it did seem from the get-go that there was, it was written in a very polite way, in quite a warm way in some regards, and so it did leave the door open for there to be a direct communication. And of course, Kim Kye Gwan followed up on Friday with a pretty well written response that certainly left the door open. Well, it suggested that the DPRK would be interested in dialogue, and it seems that worked, because we're now in a position where it looks increasingly likely like the summit will still go ahead for June 12th in Singapore.
Yeah, let's just go back to Trump's letter for a moment. It seemed quite clear that it was directly dictated by Trump himself, right? I mean, it sounded very Trumpian, if we can say that.
There was a thing about how our nuclear weapons are so much bigger than yours, and we pray to God we'll never use them, that's Trump.
Right, and also that curious line about I heard that this meeting was at your request, but that's irrelevant, or something like that. It's kind of an odd way to
because there was this strange back and forth between. Obviously, we had always thought that it was Kim Jong Un who had requested the meeting because that's what the South Koreans said. And then the North Koreans were saying a lot like, we never requested it, it's the Americans that want it, we never beg for dialogue, etc., etc.
And they repeated that on Sunday in the Rodong Shinmun, which was quite interesting. But I mean, I guess it really depends where you start. How you define the starting point for this request, because we know that back in the early months of this year, and especially late last year, the US kept on saying, the likes of Pompeo, that they're trying to have talks with the North Koreans. The North Koreans are not responding. The advance team was in Singapore, had been waiting for 3 days. The DPRK side hadn't responded, and they took that. Obviously took offence and umbrage with that. But there seems to be a repeating problem with North Korean bureaucracy where there is this high-level buy-in from someone like Kim Jong Un, and then tactically the implementation of it often doesn't quite mirror what we see from the top. And you have to wonder whether or not this issue with the team in Singapore could just be some kind of stovepiping in the North Korean system, where junior mid-level diplomats from the Foreign Ministry haven't been given their brief as to how to engage with the Americans, and that's led to them just not knowing what to do. In my experience talking to North Korean diplomats has been, if they don't know how to respond to something, they just ignore you.
Right, so they haven't been empowered to actually go out there and do the low-level negotiations or discussions, and so they're not picking up the phone, they're not answering any emails.
Right. But here's the question as well. There must have been, I've not seen any reports of this, but there must be some kind of negotiations going on between the North Koreans and the Singaporeans as well, just on logistical issues, because Kim Jong Un is going to fly into Singapore in, I guess it looks like a week or so. Yep. What's going to happen? The security is going to be huge. It's the furthest Kim Jong Un has ever gone from home. Where's his plane going to land?
Okay,
what's the situation there?
I saw that discussed a little bit on South Korean television, that there's an airbase apparently on Singapore that would be, if I were in charge of security, would be the perfect place for Kim Jong Un to land, and maybe even they have a facility there for meetings. Obviously, that doesn't cover hotels and accommodation, but at least that covers your plane landing and your meeting places, where the media can't get close to you and interfere. Do you get a sense that the airbase is a location, Chad?
Possible. It could always be Changi Airport as well, the main one. And we will likely see there being 2 aircraft that come on the North Korean side. One, an IL-76 cargo plane that will bring his armoured limousine and a presumably quite large bunch of bodyguards, and then his private jet as well. But we're still, as we record this, not 100% sure that will go ahead. I mean, it seems like 90% sure now that it will, but we're yet to get the total clarification on that.
What's been the American public response to Kim Kye Gwan's conciliatory letter?
Well, it's kind of, they suggested it was back on. So Trump was asked on Friday, what's going on, and Trump did his whole, it might happen, it might not happen.
Right.
And then Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, said, well, we're still sending a planning committee to Singapore. So it looked as though all the doom and gloom of Friday had been slightly overstated, because the assumption is when the president says something, that's the final decision. But with this administration, the ambiguity is so enormous.
Well, we know that Trump likes chaos, and he likes to. He doesn't want America to be predictable, so he likes to project an air of unpredictability. We know that. He's talked about this. He's written about this.
Out of the deal.
Right.
So I mean, it could have just been a tactical thing. And also, I mean, looking at it from a sort of positive bias, you could say that it's a good way of telling the North Koreans that this administration is not up. You know, it's not prepared for games, delays, messing around. If you want to behave like that, then this is going to be the response. We'll just walk away completely and start talking about military options and so on.
But if it is a tactical thing, well, as of now, as we're recording this podcast, it looks like the summit is back on, right?
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead because on Saturday morning we were at the point where still a maybe after the Kim Kye Gwan letter, and then suddenly Saturday afternoon there was this big news, Dagyum, about a lightning summit between Moon and Kim, a second summit. Now, just as a bit of background there before I get you to talk about it, the time between the first Kim Dae-jung and Kim Jong-il summit and the second Norm Hyun and Kim Jong-il summit, that was 7 years. And the time between that summit and the Kim-Moon summit was 11 years, well, almost 11 years, certainly more than 10. And now here we are, less than 2 months later, 1 month later, bam, second summit.
My understanding is that there was kind of hotline between Kim Young-chul, who is the director of United Front Department and Central Committee of Workers' Party of Korea, and Seo-hoon, who is the director of National Intelligence Service. So there was kind of like hotline between two. And my understanding is that Kim Young-chul and Seo-hoon took the initiative in organizing the second summit.
Okay, so it wasn't a direct phone call between Kim and Moon, and Kim said, hey, I'm having a bit of a tough time with this Trump character. Can we have a meeting tomorrow?
In theory, that line is open now, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they
right,
could have
there is
done it,
so does that mean there are two hotlines then? One between the leaders and one between...
There was, before Pyeongchang Olympic was held in South Korea, there was hotline between Seo-hoon and Kim Young-chul. That's one unofficial one. And now we have hotline between President Moon and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. But Hangyeol reported that the summit could happen because Kim and Moon held secretive phone calls through hotline on Friday. And President Moon also mentioned that North Korean leaders proposed to hold a second summit Friday afternoon.
So the North Koreans prepared it, but I think that Hankyoreh story was incorrect.
Hankyoreh said that the Moon had asked for it, but Moon said yesterday, no, Kim Jong Un said, let's do the talks.
Okay. And so when they actually sat down for talks, there were four of them in a room together, right? Two on one side, two on the other. So there was Kim and Moon, obviously. Who did Kim have with him?
There was Kim Young-chul, as just mentioned, who is the director of United Front Department and Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, and Seo-hoon, who is the director of South Korean Spy Agency. So it's 2-2 meeting, basically,
So the main outcomes were that the two Koreas have agreed to have the recently cancelled inter-Korean talks on June 1st. They'll be following those at a later date, which we don't know yet, with talks between the two militaries and also Red Cross. Red Cross ones being in preparation for family reunions.
So the June 15 meetings might still go ahead then?
Well, like I said, there's been no dates confirmed on that. Okay. They did say that they wanted to accelerate implementation of the April 27th Panmunjom Declaration, which includes, importantly, the goal of denuclearizing the entire peninsula.
Right.
And ensure that the June 12th Singapore summit goes ahead and is a success. So those are the sort of concrete outcomes.
Yeah. So that date was specifically mentioned then for June 12th in Singapore.
Yeah, it was specifically mentioned both in Moon's statement and in the DPRK reporting of that, which is interesting.
So they're still committed to that date, absolutely.
Yeah. And then the Moon as well, he talked about the importance of preliminary working level negotiations ahead of Singapore, which seemed to be a nod to the problems that had taken place. But I want to point out, when Moon did the press conference yesterday, there were a few things that we picked up on that did look like areas for cause for concern. Most importantly, I think, was when Moon was questioned about how North Korea defines complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, CVID. He really sidestepped the question and said that it was, something that's better for the US to talk directly with DPRK on, which suggests there's probably still quite a big gulf between those two positions. The other thing was that they're do seem to be some issues about North Korea's view surrounding the potential US concessions in the economic sphere. On Sunday, while the North Korean front cover and page 2 of Rodong Shinmun were all about this summit, on page 6 there was this small article which was complaining to US media about how they have been describing the economic benefits that could be offered to the North Koreans, and the North Koreans seem to be saying that that's not something that they're interested in. So that could remove a big point of leverage from the US if there is really no interest in that.
Right, this thing that Mike Pompeo talked about recently, right, that private money and investment going into North Korea to help with infrastructure and other sorts of projects.
Yeah, that's right. And then the other thing is that we wrote about was Moon said that Kim Jong Un still has concerns about the ability to trust US security concerns, which is going to be a very big hurdle to overcome. And I mean, my take on this was that if the DPRK wants to take that to an extreme level, it will require the US side to be silent on points of contention like human rights, political prisoners, because US pressure on those issues in a way is a form of pressure on the leadership, which ipso facto is a security challenge. So to 100% satisfy that in a way that the North Koreans can trust is very, very difficult to imagine how you could do that, because it would require the US to sort of self-censor itself on certain issues, and to be able to guarantee that the administrations in future will do that as well. It seems very, very complicated.
On a tangible level, the historical precedent would be a non-aggression pact. So you have a peace treaty, then you have a non-aggression pact. Yeah. But the problem with non-aggression pacts is historically, the famous one would be the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between USSR and Nazi Germany. Not a great precedent really for this situation. So I can't.
And certainly not a good sign for the country in between, Poland.
Yeah.
I mean, pact is just pact. So I think the real issue is like confidence, like building process. So that's why Moon asked both to meet up together at the same place, because Moon is a good mediator, but that there is certain limitations that South Korea actually can't mediate with each other. So that's why Moon kept asking both to sit down together and discuss issues in person. That's the best way to build trust.
Do you think we'll see more of these sudden Kim and Moon summits in the future?
I think it's possible, and I don't think it's unpredictable in a way, because Moon suggests that he may hold talks with Kim Jong Un when he was in Washington.
But yeah, Moon did say in the statement yesterday, didn't he, that we can meet anytime, anywhere, anyhow, for whatever reason, whenever we want to, right?
And Moon is supposed to go to Pyongyang at some point. They said that in the Panmunjom declaration in October, right?
Since that summit, we've now got news about a new US advance team, if it is a new team, apparently headed up by US Ambassador to the Philippines, Song Kim. Who can tell us about that?
Yesterday, there were reports in South Korean press, actually, because everyone did credit the Washington Post for this, I think, but
even South Korean TV credited the Washington Post for this, but that was after the South Korean press.
Asia Economy, right? Was it?
Asia Economy,
that was saying, this has happened, and my thought was dismissed. I thought, well, how have they got this scoop, and the Washington Post hasn't? Yeah. And then I fell asleep, and then I woke up, and the Washington Post had confirmed it, and the State Department confirmed it, and they said, we sent these US officials crossed the DMZ, went to Tongyogak.
So they went to the same meeting where Saturday Summit was held?
They did.
And was the first round yesterday?
Yes. Okay. And they had their chats with the North Koreans, and they talked about the summit taking place and how that was going to work, and which is pretty substantive. I mean, it's probably the most publicly held talks, I guess, since Pompeo went to Pyongyang.
Now, Chad, it is unusual to pull an ambassador out of another country, namely the Philippines, and send him on this kind of a working level talks meeting to a third country, namely Korea. So why was Song Kim chosen for this?
Well, he used to be ambassador to South Korea. He's Korean American, so I assume he speaks very good Korean. And he's also had a lot of negotiation experience with North Korea. He was the special envoy on North Korea issues under the Obama administration for a period of time. So, he's experienced, and they probably thought, well, we could do with having someone that has a bit of tacit knowledge of dealing with North Korea, and, it made sense to bring him in. I'm not sure if it's unprecedented, but it does seem very unusual to draw in an ambassador from a different country to focus on such an important task. But I think the move has been welcomed on all sides because he's an Obama era guy, and for all the people on Twitter who seem to despise Trump so much, I actually saw quite a few positive reactions to this from more liberal voices.
One of their own.
Yeah. So, I think all sides can agree it's a good move because it diversifies the team a bit on the US side. It's not all hawks. We're bringing in, I say we, I'm not American, they're bringing in someone who's got that experience, which is good.
Is that a sign that they've moved the preliminary talks from Singapore to Panmunjom now, or?
Well, the Singapore pre-negotiations, I think that's mainly on logistics and figuring out infrastructure, and they still haven't announced which hotel it's going to be, Marine Bay Sands or Shangri-La. So
but NKNews has them both covered.
We have them both covered, and we benefited a lot from this cancellation because the prices came down.
Hey!
So yeah, it's looking good. We didn't cancel our flights because actually we did think there was something a bit odd about President Trump's statement. Right. So I'm glad to say it appears we got that right.
Okay. Well, any last thoughts before our rapid response podcast ends?
Oh yeah, that thing we were talking about, this triple hug thing.
Oh yeah.
That Kim Jong Un did to Moon Jae-in.
At the end of the meeting.
Yeah, I was commenting that that's kind of a Swiss thing, that you do the burr.
Right.
But you said it's more like a kind of Eastern European style bear hug.
Yeah, the bear hug and the air kissing.
That's typical socialist way to,
It's also the Swiss thing, because there's always confusion when Swiss people go to France, because French people do the two pecs.
And Kim Jong-un didn't hug Xi Jinping's like that.
There you go. That's the Minjuk fair there, isn't it? Hey. Listeners, don't forget to stay on our website, nknews.org, the leading repository of all news about North Korea. And we expect we'll have another roundtable podcast again very soon. So stay tuned and keep listening. Thanks again to our special guest today, Oliver.
Thank you.
Dagyum.
감사합니다.
Chad.
Yep, cheers.
Okay, listen next time. Bye-bye.